Old photographs from the 19th century hold a strange and unsettling secret. They capture magnificent cities with monumental architecture, wide avenues, and perfectly designed squares. The grandeur of these structures is stunning, but these scenes are missing the most crucial element: life. A closer look reveals what a passing glance might miss. The cities are practically empty. The houses have chimneys, but no smoke rises from any of them, suggesting there is no warmth or comfort inside. We see vast metropolises that should be bustling with trade and daily activity, filled with thousands of people. Yet, the photos show only one or two random passers-by, their figures only emphasizing the scale of the ghostly emptiness around them. This strange, unnatural emptiness raises a series of disturbing questions. If these cities were abandoned, why? Where did their former inhabitants disappear to, leaving behind entire metropolises in perfect condition? And perhaps the most important and intriguing question: where did the new people come from to fill this void and breathe new life into these stone giants? Official history sidesteps these anomalies, offering standard explanations that don't hold up against the sheer scale of the phenomenon. It feels as if a whole layer of our past has been deliberately erased or distorted. But this isn't just a historical puzzle hidden away in dusty archives. The key to solving it may lie in another, equally massive and mysterious event of that era: the sudden and inexplicable appearance of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of orphans all over the world. It was in the 19th century that countless orphanages, foundling homes, and charitable institutions began to spring up like mushrooms after the rain across the planet. Their scale is astonishing. According to official records, one such institution alone took in about 4,500 infants, and it was just one of many. A partial list from open sources names more than 64 large orphanages founded in Great Britain alone during that period, and even that list is far from complete. The number of children left without parental care was so vast that researchers still can't determine the real figures. This phenomenon became a global event. But how could such a colossal number of orphans appear at one single moment in history? Why did their stories, which never made it into the record books, simply vanish, forgotten and erased from collective memory? Is this connected to the empty cities frozen in old photographs? These questions remain unanswered. But one thing is clear: official history isn't giving us the full picture. What if these two phenomena, empty metropolises and countless orphans, are parts of a single global process hidden from us? A process that could be called a great migration, or even a complete reset of civilization. This wave of orphanhood that swept the world in the 19th century wasn't just a tragic series of events. It was a phenomenon on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. Across Europe, America, Russia, and even Australia, a global network of institutions was rapidly built to house the endless stream of parentless children. These weren't just modest charity homes. They were enormous, sometimes palace-like buildings capable of holding thousands. Overcrowded orphanages and foundling homes became as much a feature of the era as steam engines and gas lamps. The endless flow of infants and older children required a whole infrastructure that seemed to appear out of nowhere to handle this demographic anomaly. Of course, official history tries to explain this surge with wars, the Industrial Revolution, and high mortality rates from disease. While these factors certainly played a role, can they fully account for the colossal numbers? Wars leave orphans, but those are usually localized tragedies. Here, we're talking about a global, widespread phenomenon that lasted for decades. Epidemics claimed many lives. But could they have created such a specific imbalance, leaving behind millions of children without any care, as if their parents had simply vanished? If you add up all the known conflicts and diseases of that time, the numbers still don't match. The scale of the problem was so immense that it goes beyond conventional historical explanations, suggesting some kind of catastrophe or event that has been erased from our history. It is here that the two great mysteries of the 19th century begin to merge into one disturbing picture. On one hand, we have majestic but lifeless cities, silent witnesses to a bygone civilization. On the other, we have overflowing orphanages, teeming with children who have no past and whose origins are shrouded in mystery. What if these are not two separate phenomena, but two sides of the same coin? What if this endless flood of orphans was not the problem, but the solution? Perhaps these children were the human resource needed to repopulate the empty territories and cities across the globe. The thought is monstrous, but it logically connects the unexplained emptiness with the unexplained abundance of young lives. But if we assume that children were indeed the key to repopulating the world, the story becomes even stranger and more sinister, especially when you look at how infants were treated in the New World. There, in America, at the turn of the century, the attitude toward children reached a new public and commercialized level, blurring the line between care and entertainment, between a human being and a commodity. Before we find direct evidence that children could be bought and sold, it's worth looking at how society was gradually conditioned to accept this idea. For that, we need to travel to the bustling World's Fairs and amusement parks, where human life was put on public display in the most shocking and unexpected way. At the turn of the 20th century in America, a phenomenon emerged that blurred all conceivable lines between medicine, business, and outright spectacle. At the center of this story is Martin Cooney, a man whom official history has celebrated as a hero and savior, but whose activities, upon closer inspection, are deeply unsettling. Cooney organized traveling exhibitions across the country, and their main attraction was premature babies. In amusement parks and at World's Fairs, amidst rides and vendor stalls, he set up fully functioning intensive care units. Visitors strolling with ice cream and cotton candy could pay a modest fee to enter a pavilion where tiny, barely viable infants lay in rows of glass incubators. The atmosphere of these exhibits was utterly surreal. Awed spectators looked at the babies just as they would any other attraction at the fair. Carnival barkers loudly called for the public to come see the living dolls, while nurses in crisp white uniforms cared for the children as part of the show. The life-saving process was turned into a profitable spectacle. But the most sinister part is that at many of the fairs where Cooney exhibited these children, there were simultaneous expositions dedicated to eugenics, the pseudoscience of selective breeding to improve the human race. The very ideology that would later form the basis for the darkest chapters of 20th century history peacefully coexisted with a pavilion showcasing saved yet imperfect children. This strange juxtaposition raises many uncomfortable questions. Why were these exhibits so incredibly popular? Did people at that time not have children of their own, making the sight of an infant a novelty? The official story claims that Cooney saved around 80,000 babies. But where did such an unimaginable number of premature infants come from, whose parents were willing to hand them over to a showman? Can we believe that America at that time had a large enough population to account for the birth of so many babies needing such care? The story seems highly questionable. Was this something more than just saving lives? Was it conditioning society to the idea that a child is an object that can be displayed, evaluated, and perhaps even acquired? This normalization of turning children into public exhibits may have been just the first step. While America was mesmerized by the spectacle of saving babies, a far more direct and frightening practice was developing on the other side of the Atlantic, in Europe. It was hidden in plain sight, disguised in the most innocent and common item of the time, the postcard. What at first glance looked like quirky vintage humor or sentimental art was actually something else entirely. It was a quiet but effective tool for carrying out transactions we don't speak of today. This hidden mechanism found its perfect expression in the most mundane item of that era, the postcard. In the early 20th century, a whole genre of visual culture appeared that today is baffling and disturbing. It was a massive series of postcards, numbering in the thousands, dedicated to babies. But these were not your typical sentimental portraits. These cards depicted surreal and sometimes frankly terrifying scenes, as if from a strange dream. Children were shown emerging from cabbage patches, hatching from giant eggs, growing on mushrooms, or floating in shells on the water. They were transported by airships, trains, and even delivered by storks, as if they were some kind of cargo. These images create a persistent feeling of anxiety, as if they contain a hidden, deeper meaning that was understood by their contemporaries but has been lost to us. When you try to find any systematic information about this phenomenon, you're met with a deafening silence. It seems as though this part of history was deliberately hidden or simply swept under the rug because of its controversial nature. There are no official catalogs or serious studies dedicated to this style. The only vague mention can be found in a little-known book, which admits that little is known about the history of these postcards, but notes their influence on surrealist artists, including Salvador Dalí himself. This information vacuum only deepens the suspicion that we are looking at more than just peculiar art, but something far more significant and sinister. They feel as if they've been torn from their historical context, left to us as silent artifacts of a forgotten era. A gradual deciphering begins when you pay attention to the details and inscriptions. Although most of the postcards are written in French, their popularity wasn't limited to France. Collections include examples from the United States with American postage stamps, as well as German and Dutch cards. This indicates that the phenomenon was international, even global. The inscriptions, which at first seem part of the overall surreal design, start to form a single, shocking system upon closer inspection. This was not just a collection of random images, but a whole language understood by people all over the world. A language that described a process beyond our modern understanding of morality. At first glance, one might dismiss all this as strange vintage humor, a peculiar aesthetic of a bygone era. Indeed, many of the images seem amusing and cute. But what if this is just a mask, hiding the true purpose of these messages from the past? What if we translate the captions on these postcards literally, setting aside any assumption of metaphor or jest? Brace yourself, because what we will find there is not just strange. It has the power to overturn our understanding of what was considered normal just 100 years ago, and will forever change your perception of the past. The veil of artistic whimsy and vintage humor is torn away the moment we stop seeing these postcards as metaphors and start reading them literally. The key to this code is a simple but chilling phrase that repeats on dozens of images with frightening regularity. It's the French expression, à vendre, which translates literally to for sale. This is not a hint, not an allegory, and not a joke. It is a direct, unambiguous announcement that turns a surreal scene into a commercial offer. And once this fact becomes clear, the entire collection of these strange postcards is cast in a completely different, sinister light. This wasn't just art. These were catalogs. Let's look at these images as advertisements of their time. One card depicts a whole fairground scene under a sign that reads, "Modern Baby Bazaar." Below are the terms, which could belong to any store. Free entry. We fear no competition. Everything is for sale. And at the end, the most chilling line, emphasizing the finality of the deal: we do not accept returns. This establishment presents itself as trustworthy, yet clearly states its no-return policy, implying that a child is a commodity that becomes the buyer's full responsibility after purchase. On another postcard showing babies among cabbages, an invitation reads, "Choose, the little ones have just grown." The very wording "grown" is more suited to describing a harvest than living people, pulling us deeper into this monstrous logic. But the height of this commercial cynicism is found on postcards where each child has a kind of resume, a list of their consumer qualities. Infants sit in baskets, each with a caption designed to persuade a potential buyer to make a choice. I will be good. I won't wet the bed. I am cheerful. I will love you. I am cute. This is nothing less than a product description aimed at a target audience: childless couples or families looking for an addition. It's a window into a disturbing era when children were treated as objects, with specific features and even a no-return policy. And if you step back from analyzing the text and just look into the faces of the children depicted on these cards, it's unsettling. Many of them look unhappy. Some are crying or clearly frightened. There are images where children are locked in cages, like pets for sale. The caption on one such postcard leaves no room for imagination. Children for sale. Do you want a baby? This isn't funny or cute. It's a reminder of how radically different social norms and moral values were just a century ago. This isn't art. It's a marketplace. These postcards were more than just advertisements. They revealed the entire system behind this phenomenon. They hint not only at the sale, but also at the process of producing and delivering children. Popular folk images that we've come to see as harmless tales may have actually been a reflection of this global logistics network. Let's look at how this system worked and what role cabbage patches, stork couriers, and other seemingly fairy tale elements played in it. If we accept the theory of a global child trafficking system, many of the myths and fairy tales we grew up with take on a completely different, disturbing meaning. What we've always considered innocent explanations for curious children may actually be echoes of a real, functioning system from the past. The popular phrase, "you were found in a cabbage patch," is no longer just a funny fib. In the context of postcards, where children are literally shown growing in fields, the cabbage becomes a symbol of the mass cultivation of a new generation, like a harvest. It's a metaphor for turning human life into a product that can be cultivated on an industrial scale. Similarly, the image of a stork bringing a baby in its beak might not be just a beautiful legend, but a symbolic representation of a complex delivery and logistics network. Storks on old postcards are often depicted as couriers, sometimes even wearing uniform caps, carrying scales to weigh the goods, or holding postman's bags. They are part of a transportation system, along with trains, cars, and even airships, which also frequently appear in these images as a means of transporting large groups of infants. All of this points to an organized infrastructure for distributing children to different regions. This theory finds chilling confirmation in real historical facts. Consider the so-called orphan trains in the United States, which ran from the mid-19th to the early 20th century. Officially, this was a social welfare program designed to find new families for homeless children from the overcrowded cities of the East Coast. But the scale of this phenomenon is staggering. More than 200,000 children were transported and distributed to farms and small towns in the Midwest. Were these trains merely a humanitarian mission? Or were they part of that same global logistics project symbolically depicted on the postcards? The overlap in timing and purpose seems too significant to be a coincidence. An even more direct indication of the true goal of this massive operation comes from postcards that feature the word repopulation. This term leaves no room for ambiguity. This isn't just about caring for orphans. It's about a deliberate process of settling territories. This word ties all the pieces of the puzzle together. The empty cities in need of inhabitants, the mass appearance of orphans as a resource for this settlement, and the developed system for their distribution and sale to new parents. If we assume that children were indeed cultivated in vast numbers and then systematically distributed around the world to settle cities left empty after some catastrophe, it leads us to one final and perhaps most terrifying question. A question that challenges the very foundations of our understanding of history and ourselves. When all the pieces of this incredible puzzle fall into place, a picture emerges that is so vast and monstrous that the mind refuses to accept it. But the facts stubbornly form a single logical chain. It all begins with the ghost-like metropolises of the 19th century, inherited from unknown predecessors and in desperate need of a new population. This demographic vacuum is filled by a suddenly appearing, inexhaustible source. Millions of orphans, concentrated in a global network of orphanages and foundling homes, which essentially became reservoirs of human resources. The connecting link, the proof, and the instruction manual for this resource are the postcards. They cease to be mere strange artifacts and become catalogs, offering a product with a description of its qualities and terms of sale. And the entire system of folk myths about cabbage patches and stork couriers turns out to be nothing more than a symbolic cover for a real, well-oiled global program for cultivating and distributing a new population. This chain of evidence leads us to one truly grand and terrifying hypothesis: the Great Reset. According to this theory, at some point in the past, a global catastrophe or event occurred that led to a massive depopulation of the planet. Civilization had to be literally resettled, and children became the primary, if not the only, building material for this new world. In this context, even the most daring and disturbing assumptions acquire a dark logic. The incubators at the world's fairs may have been not just a means of saving lives, but also part of a technology for the mass nurturing, or even artificial cultivation, of infants. Images of children in training camps or with the top-hatted elite suggest that this was not just a chaotic settlement, but a deliberate program to prepare future citizens with predefined social roles, be it obedient workers or loyal soldiers of a new order. The sale and distribution of infants were not just a shadow business, but part of a large-scale operation to construct a society from scratch. Could it be that the most famous and beloved children's fairy tales we tell our kids are actually a cover-up for one of the darkest and most extensive operations in human history? Is it possible that our past hides a secret so profound that it was preferable to turn it into innocent myths so that future generations would never ask uncomfortable questions? Official history is silent, but these postcards, these silent witnesses from the past, speak for themselves, inviting us to look at our civilization from a completely different, unsettling angle. What do you think about this?